Good morning to our distinguished speaker, Professor Angelo, and all of our honorable guests. Welcome to the Biomedical Translational Research Center BioTrap at the National Biotechnology Research Park, Academia Sinica. It is my great pleasure to have you join this special meeting with the Professor Lo. On behalf of the BioTrap, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Professor Lo for coming to the NBRP and share with us his valuable knowledge and experience in mentoring the startup and the biotech company. Before his presentation, I would like to take a moment to briefly introduce the Professor Lo. Professor Lo received his bachelor degree in economics from Yale University and his PhD degree in economics from Harvard University. He is currently the professor at MIT Sloan School of Management and the director of MIT for Financial Engineering. Besides, he is an academician, and a fellow of the American Academy of Art and Science, and a fellow of the Econometrics Society and the Society of Financial Econometrics. Professor Lo has a significant contribution in the field of economic, finance, and accounting. He has published more than 388 articles in peer-reviewed research journal and 15 books. He has won many awards for his outstanding contribution. With Professor Lo's great knowledge in the economic, finance, and Professor Harvey Lodish's deep knowledge in biology and biotechnology, they co-lectured a famous course, The Science and the Business of Biotechnology at MIT, which now became a public online course that has helped many students and researchers around the world to get a comprehensive understanding of science, disease, and technology, and how to build a business model and the financial structure to facilitate drug discovery and the development for biotech company. In addition, using the AI and the financial technology, Professor Lo continued to develop new models and statistical tools to accelerate biomedical innovation and facilitate clinical development. So today we are very honored to have Professor Lo to give us a talk, to share with us his valuable experience and with us. So without further ado, please join me to give a warmest welcome to Professor Lo.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking Director Wu for the generous introduction and for inviting me to be with all of you today. I know that some of you were at the talk that I gave yesterday, so I'm going to try not to repeat too much of it, but there will be a little bit of a repeat just to make sure that I cover the same kind of things that are important for the topic today, which is financial engineering applications for accelerating translational medicine. I also want to thank Academia Sinica not only for holding this event, but for inviting me to join this incredibly prestigious organization years ago. One of my greatest professional honors is to be a fellow of Academia Sinica. In fact, I have to show you that I carry in my wallet my card. But I have to say that as grateful and honored as I am to have colleagues in Academia Sinica in economics I never would have expected to have the honor of speaking to biologists and other scientists. It's an extraordinary honor for me to be here with all of you. And I want to thank you for doing what you do for patients around the world. So very briefly, I got interested in medicine about 15 years ago. Prior to that, I had no interest in medicine. I wasn't even interested in healthcare economics. It was quite boring to me. I was much more interested in finance, in making money, and figuring out how not to lose money. But life happened. A number of friends and family were dealing with various kinds of cancer, and I realized that as an economist, I had nothing to contribute, and that got me very frustrated. So I started thinking more about how cancer drugs are developed, how biotech companies succeed and fail, and the more I learned, the more I realized that finance plays a role, and that's what I would like to talk with you about today. I had a brief tour of this facility, and I have to say this is just amazing. Obviously, I come from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the biotech hub there is very well developed, but this biotech park is just extraordinary, and what's happening here is extraordinary. And I don't know whether you realize how extraordinary it is relative to what's going on around the world. I can tell you that, and my colleagues from MIT, some of which will be with you in May, they will tell you that as well. So thank you for sharing that with me, and I'm really excited to talk about the business side of things, which is of course what I'm an expert in. I certainly won't talk about any of the science or medicine. That's your domain. Now, when I start lecturing in finance for my first year MBA students, the first thing I tell them is that finance is the most important subject you'll ever be exposed to in management school. And they get very surprised by that statement, because one of the students said, well, you know, Professor Lo, my accounting professor said the same thing, and so did my marketing professor, and so did my organizational studies professor and operations management. And I said, yes, but the difference is that in my case, I'm right. And the reason I'm right is because no matter what you study, no matter what you do when you graduate, no matter what field you're involved in, at some point or another, you're going to need money. And when you do, you need to speak my language. So that's the same with biotech. Obviously, the science comes first. But once the science is ready to be commercialized, at that point, you need money. And the question is, how do you get it? So that's what I want to talk about today. Now, in order for me to talk about that, I need to explain something that all of you know better than I do, because you're part of this. Biomedicine is at an inflection point. We are at a point now that is different than any other time in the history of biotech. And you obviously know of Dr. Paul Hu's work on gene therapy. It was funded partly by Academia Sinica and the NBRT. So it's an amazing, amazing story. I only learned about it because of the company that licensed Dr. Hu's technology. They were running out of money, and so they approached me. And so I wrote a case study about them to try to help them raise more money. And so you can download this paper. If you can't, for whatever reason, if it's behind a paywall, email me and I'll mail it to you for free. You don't have to pay for it. This case study describes how this company ultimately was able to license Dr. Hu's technology, and within 18 months was able to set up and conduct a clinical trial that ultimately, when the FDA looked at the results of a phase 1, phase 2 trial, when they looked at the results, 10 patients, they said, no more testing. You can apply for a license for the drug. And the drug is approved now in Europe. It'll be approved later in the United States, and hopefully soon thereafter in Taiwan. This is an interesting and amazing story that will give you a sense of how translational medicine works in this one example for an ultra-rare disease. Very difficult to fund, but ultimately this company was sold, it was acquired by another one for approximately $900 million. One drug, 10 patients, $900 million. That's the possibilities of the amazing work that all of you are doing. So The other way that I want to describe the inflection point is using my world of finance, money. So in the year 2000, if I asked you to list the 30 worldwide best-selling drugs, the drugs that make the most money for their companies, this is the list. This is the list of the top 30 in the year 2000. And in blue are those drugs that came out of biotech or academia. 26 out of the top 30 were developed by Big Pharma in the year 2000. And that's the way it was prior to the year 2000. Big Pharma developed all of the drugs. Biotech played a small role. Let me show you what 2018 looks like. The same list of the top 30 best-selling drugs in the year 2018. And now, in blue, are those drugs that came out of biotech or academia. 24 out of the top 30, 9 out of the top 10 drugs. Big Pharma is no longer developing early-stage drugs. What they're doing is waiting for you to do it, and they'll buy it from you when they need to, after it's been de-risked. So this trend is happening for two reasons. One, the science is moving very quickly, and Big Pharma can't keep up. But more importantly, too, Big Pharma doesn't have to keep up because they have all the money. And so they can let you take the risk, and when you decide or when you develop your particular experiments to the point where the risk is low enough, then Big Pharma will write you a big check and buy it from you. That's the new world of biopharma that we're living in today. And that's why what all of you are doing here is so important. But one thing that you can add to that is that translational piece, which you're already doing, and hopefully I can describe a little bit about how we can deal with that. This is a slide that I showed yesterday about the omics revolution and the fact that every one of these omics has experienced tremendous progress except for one, and that is economics. We're using the same old business models for funding biotech, namely venture capital, and I think we need to be just as innovative with economics as we are with genomics, epigenomics, metabolomics, and so on. So what I'm talking about is the valley of death, and the valley of death is something that all of you are experiencing here. Valley of death is raising money for translational medicine. After you run your laboratory experiments and you're ready to go into animals or start looking for potential human experimentation, IND, it's very, very difficult to raise money. Why? And as an economist, my answer is it has to do with increasing risk and uncertainty. It's because as you start thinking about taking your ideas and translating them into practical applications, it's becoming more and more difficult. And from an investor's point of view, they're scared because they don't know whether or not what you're doing is really going to work. In fact, you don't know whether it's going to work. So the question is, what can we do about this? This is where the valley of death resides. And in order to do that, I have to talk very briefly about the life cycle of a biotech company. And again, most of you already know this. I apologize for repeating, but I want to describe this pathway for a specific reason, and you'll see why in a minute. The way that a typical biotech company begins is with a person and an idea. You have an idea about how to deal with a particular disease. And whether it's a small molecule, or protein, or gene therapy, gene editing, yet that idea has to be tested. And so what do? You run some experiments, and sometimes you bring in collaborators. And over a period of months to years, you are laboring to come up with that final set of data that will prove that your idea may have some potential. Okay, so you've done that. You've done your experiments, now that you're ready to put all of the data together, what do you do at that point? What's the next step? Publish? Publish a paper, right? Thank you. Not publish a paper. Most academics say, yeah, publish a paper. No. File a patent. And then publish the paper. You have to file a patent first, and it's remarkable. I've given talks like this at MIT. And the biotech faculty members, they don't know this. The biologists, they don't know this. They say, why do I want to file a patent? I don't want to restrict my ideas. I believe in academic freedom. You know, some people say it's obscene to file a patent. You're trying to, keep my ideas hidden. No, that's not what a patent does. A patent protects the exclusivity of the idea, not for you. After you file a patent, yes, then go publish, no problem. But the patent protects the intellectual property, not for you, but for the investor that's going to write a $5 million, $10 million, $20 million check to you to take your idea and implement it in a company. That's the purpose of the patent. It's to protect the investors who are going to be giving you money to turn your idea into a drug. So, file patent disclosure. Then, as soon as you do that, literally as soon as you file that piece of paper, you can go publish the article. It protects it. If you do it in reverse, it doesn't work. Once you publish a paper, it is considered in the public domain, then nobody owns it. And therefore, if it costs $100 million to take that idea and develop it, nobody will pay the $100 million because they can't get a return. Investors can't get a return on that. Okay, then you get money, you file a patent, you get the patent, publish the paper, you maybe do some mouse models, animal models, you have an amazing facility right here to do that. And then, after that, when the patent gets awarded, at that point, with the data from the animal models and the patent, then, at that point, you can start looking for money. And this is where the valley of death is between here and here. Getting the money means you can rent lab space. And in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we have Lab Central. But here, you offer facilities, I believe, for companies. That's an amazing, amazing advantage that you have. A wonderful thing. And here, you are starting to develop preclinical work to the point where you actually can file for an IND to put it into humans. And then once you do, you get into your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And every once in a while, you will be lucky and get a drug. And most of the time, you will not. And it will blow up. Sorry, I teach MBA students, so I have to have sound effects. So that's the life cycle. And the question is, why is it so hard to raise money? Why? That's what I've been asking ever since 15 or 20 years ago when people that are around me started dying of cancer. And I know cancer doctors that tell me they have potential solutions to what my friends and family were going through. Why can't they raise money? And it has to do with risk. How do biotech companies fail? Now, I'm going to rule out incompetence and fraud. So I believe that everybody in this room is honest and is not going to be cheating investors. And I also believe that you're all competent. You may not know accounting or economics, but in your field, I believe you're all competent. So let's rule out incompetence and fraud. Then in that case, when you start a company, how does it fail? Turns out there are 4 reasons. 4 reasons that biotech companies fail. The first reason is the science or medicine doesn't work. That can happen. You can't predict that. The best ideas don't always work. The first mRNA therapy did not work. The first immunotherapy did not work. The first gene editing did not work. But eventually, you figure out stuff, and then eventually maybe it'll work. So that's the first point. And you can't do anything about that. You got to try. Second, you run out of money. That happens surprisingly often. In fact, I was talking to a biotech executive who said to one of his colleagues, the stupidest thing that you can do as a biotech entrepreneur is run out of money. Because how often have you run out of gas when driving? How often has an airplane run out of fuel mid-flight? But that's, I think, unfair, because it's very easy to run out of money for reasons I'll explain. So that's the first thing, that you can run out of money. Third, investors, they lose interest in your area. So the first immunotherapy company that got launched, it didn't have a success, and the investors, they said, yeah, you know what, I don't believe this is going to work for a while, so they leave. And so investors pull out of the area. That can happen. Third, the entire economy could be in a recession, and then nobody can raise money. That's another area. So these 4 reasons that biotech companies fail, when I listed them, and I asked people around to explain if there are other reasons that I'm forgetting or did not know, they agreed with me. These are the 4 reasons. You know what? It turns out that 3 of them are financial. That's why I'm here. That's what I do, is to worry about these 3 reasons. And it turns out that if we could reduce or even eliminate the financial risk, then the only risk left is science and medicine doesn't work. And I have a solution for that. Do a lot more science and medicine. Meaning, invest in a lot of different things. If you believe mRNA works, fine. Invest in 25 mRNA companies. All of them doing different kinds of mRNA. You only need one to work. If that one is Moderna or BioNTech, you're all set. It takes care of all of the other tribes. That's not true in other fields, but it is true in biotech. You only need 1, maybe 2 winners, and everything else is not a problem. So that's what I've been focusing on. How do I reduce or eliminate financing risk? So this is where I talk about what investors want, and I described this yesterday, so I'll go through it very quickly. How many people were not at my talk yesterday? Because I don't want to repeat myself. Okay, fair number. So I'll go through quickly. I'm going to end in a few minutes, because I know the majority of the time should be for discussion. That's going to be the most informative. So I give this to my first-year MBA students. I give them 4 financial investments. I don't tell them what they are or over what time period they span. I just show them what happens if you put $1 and leave it there for a number of years. And this is what happens. The green line turns $1 to $2. Red line turns $1 into 5. The blue line turns $1 into 8. And the black line turns $1 into 7. But they have different risk, right? Different volatility. So by a show of hands, for those who were not at my talk yesterday, how many people would pick the green line? If you had to invest in only one of these, and you want to put your life savings, your grandparents' life savings, your children's college fund, how many people would pick the green line? No way. We don't have anybody from the FDA here? Okay. The red line. The red line. Nobody for the red line. Okay. The blue line. Anybody with the blue line? Okay, these are the biotech entrepreneurs. Okay. And then the black line. Yeah, by far the most popular is the black line, because it's got the best combination of trade-off between risk and reward. So let me tell you, first of all, the time period goes from 1990 to 2008. And the green line is US Treasury bills, safest asset in the world. But if you put your money in 2008, you would have earned basically nothing since then. Actually, less than nothing because of inflation. The red line is the US stock market, the S&P 500. And if you put your money in that, congratulations, you would have done really well since 2008. The blue line is the single pharmaceutical company, Pfizer, and if you put your money in that, well, even bigger congratulations, you would have done spectacularly well since 2008. And the black line that most of you picked, that is the returns for the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, which is why I had to stop it in 2008. That's when the Ponzi scheme blew up. You would have lost all your money in that investment. Now, why do I show this to you? It's because this is something that is intrinsic to human nature. All of us are attracted to high-yielding, low-risk assets. And in finance, we have a term called the Sharpe ratio, after Bill Sharpe, the Nobel Prize-winning Stanford economist. It's the expected return above T-bills divided by the standard deviation of the returns, the fluctuations. And so it's a measure of the risk-adjusted return. And if you calculate the Sharpe ratio of the S&P 500 and Pfizer, they're pretty close to each other, 0.43, 0.54. But if you look at the Madoff Ponzi scheme, on paper, it's fake, but on paper, it's a lot higher than the other two. And that's why people went in to this Ponzi scheme. Biomedicine has had a Sharpe ratio that's been going down. And it's not because the numerator is small. There are biotech companies like Agilis Biotherapeutics, based on Dr. Who's gene therapy, that have made a lot of money. The problem is, for the entire field, the denominator is even bigger. It's even more risky because of the technologies that you are all developing. Because when you develop a new drug, what does that do? It puts out of business the old drug that is not as good as yours. And that means investors are worried. They're worried that if they invest in you, then in 5 years' time, even if your drug gets approved, 3 years after that, somebody else will get a better drug than yours. And that's the problem with biomedicine. So this is an analysis that I did of a typical cancer drug. A cancer drug takes about $200 million, 10-year investment horizon, 5% probability of success, 95% failure rate. But if you do succeed with a cancer drug, you're going to make $2 billion a year for years 11 to 20, which is the rest of the patent life. And that means that that's equivalent to $12.3 billion. If you do the math, then it turns out that this gives you an investment of about 12% with a standard deviation of 423.5%, a Sharpe ratio close to 0. Nobody wants to invest in this. But this is where finance can play a very positive role. What finance can do is to basically take 150 of these programs. It requires a lot more money, $30 billion of capital. But you'll see where I'm going to get that from. $30 billion of capital. If I take 150 of those programs from the previous slide, that's $200 million, that's $30 billion, then I'm assuming that they're statistically independent, then what that means is the risk goes down by the square root of the number of projects, and the Sharpe ratio goes to 0.33. Not 0.03, 0.33. A Sharpe ratio that's 10 times higher. How many people would invest in this fund? Show of hands. Yeah, thank you. That's where I'm going to get the 30 million from you, not from me. I don't have it. But if we use these methods, we can bring lots more money into the space. Can we really raise the $30 billion? It turns out that the answer is yes, if my statistical assumptions hold. But if they don't, then we may not be able to raise as much. So you have to do a calculation. You have to calculate the risk-reward profile. And I published a textbook last year with one of my PhD students called Healthcare Finance. The website for the book is here. You can purchase the book, but you don't need to purchase it. If you click on resources, we have a lot of videos and other resources that you can use to be able to understand the basic concepts of healthcare finance. So feel free to access that at your leisure. All right, so let me wrap up by just briefly talking about the funding ecosystem. Basically, the way you raise money is to find the investors that are willing to take the risk that you have right now. If you are currently doing animal models, that's a lot more risky than if you already have an IND. An IND is a lot more risky than a phase 2 drug. And a phase 2 drug is more risky than one that is now a phase 3 with positive readout. And so the risk is basically going to relate to the type of characteristics, and the Sharpe ratio is going to be going up as you decrease the risk, and therefore the amount of money that you're going to be able to get is going to be increasing as you are able to de-risk the portfolio. So how do you get money? These are the different sources. Government funding, so part of the money that financed Dr. Wu's clinical trials, that was actually from the United States National Institutes of Health. That was government funding that paid for part of that. And by the way, that's available to all of you. I know you're saying, wait, we're in Taiwan. What are we going to do with NIH? NIH is looking to help diseases. And if a US-based biotech company licenses your technology, they can get money from the US government to fund the clinical trials. So that's one reason why some of you might want to start setting up companies in the US with friends or collaborators, and where you can basically negotiate rights for Taiwan versus US, and it will be a very interesting process. Venture philanthropy is a new area to raise money. Donations from very, very successful billionaires, where they don't want to just donate the money to you, though, they will invest in you through their foundation. That's a very, very important source of capital. Patient advocacy groups. Many patients have organizations that are trying to help develop treatments for their people. And so that's another source of funding. And then finally, these are the traditional methods. When you get to this level, so this is preclinical, valley of death here. This is sort of IND at that point. This is phase 1, phase 2, and then obviously when you get to phase 2, you can do an IPO, and lots of money comes in at that point. Okay, how do you tap into these resources? The bottom line is narrative. What I mean by that is you have to tell a story. That's important. And if you can tell a story, that's where this money comes from. So there's something about the role of academia. I won't have time to talk about this, but let me just conclude by giving you one last story. This is a story that I told yesterday, so I apologize for repeating it. But for those of you who weren't there, it's an important story that I think you need to know about, particularly because it involves this person, Professor Harvey Lodish, my colleague at MIT. You will see him here in May. So I want to tell you his story before he gets here. This is one of the reasons why I decided to do what I'm doing now. It's because of Harvey and the inspiration that I received. So Harvey, in 1983, was an assistant professor of biology at MIT. He had just gotten to MIT recently, and one of his colleagues asked him to collaborate on helping patients that have a very specific monogenic disorder called Gaucher syndrome. Some of you may know about it. It's a particular disease that prevents your body from producing certain housekeeping enzymes that take away fatty acids. And without that enzyme, you have fatty acids building up in various organs. And if you have a very serious version of it, you're dead by the time you're a teenager. And so Harvey and his colleagues, they produced the very first enzyme replacement therapy. And in 1991, it was approved by the FDA. It's called Ceridase. And since then, that drug and several of its improvements have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And that's why I want to be Harvey Lodish. But that's not the only reason. So it turns out that the company that Harvey started, you may have heard of it, it's called Genzyme. And in 2014, it was acquired by Sanofi for $20 billion. Now, that's not why I want to be Harvey Lodish either. It's not a bad reason, especially for an economist. I want to be Harvey because of what happened in 2002. In that year, Harvey's daughter was pregnant with her second child. Harvey and his wife's second grandchild, a boy named Andrew. It turns out that Andrew was diagnosed with Gaucher's in utero. What are the chances of that? And so I talked to Harvey about it. It was a very emotional conversation. Now, I don't know if you should bring it up in May, but if you do, it may be an emotional conversation for all of you. I asked him, Harvey, did you know in 1983 that your son, your grandson, would be diagnosed with Gaucher's? And he said, of course not. 1983 was 20 years before the human genome was sequenced. I didn't know I was carrying the gene. And Harvey said, I just thought if I could do some cool science and help some patients, that'd be wonderful. And so when Harvey's grandson turned 10 in 2012, he developed the full-blown symptoms of Gaucher. But he's doing just fine, living a totally normal life, thanks to the drug that Grandpa developed. That's why I want to be Harvey Lodish. I don't have an MD, PhD like many of you, or I will never be able to develop a drug that will save my as yet unborn grandchildren. But I realized then that we can all be Harvey Lodish if we invest in the drugs that will save our as yet unborn grandchildren. Finance doesn't have to be a zero-sum game if we don't let it. We can actually, with the right financing structures at the right scale, we can actually do well by doing good. And, with all of your help, we can do that now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Lo's wonderful talk, and share with us a very inspiring story. Okay, so right now we open the floor for discussion. Any question from our audience? Okay, yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Lo. And just a quick question. You mentioned the ecosystems, and I think in the United States it developed actually pretty much fully developed. But the recent policy from government, especially after passing of the IRS, I think that this is the people are concerned, not only the scientific community but also the industry, and also it affects how big farmers develop their products, and also all the rest of that. So as economics and what is your observations and your comments, or would it be resolved in a certain way? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Let me describe to everybody else what you're referring to. This is a very important point. So a few months ago, the United States Congress passed what's called the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. And this law was really meant to try to reduce inflation, but the way that they tried to do it in the case of drugs is for certain types of drugs, they're going to give Medicare, which is the biggest insurer in the United States, not the only one, but the government insurance company. It gives Medicare the right to negotiate prices for certain kinds of drugs. And so that does have an impact. And as a result, pharma has decided that there are certain drugs, particularly small molecule drugs, that they will no longer develop because it's not as profitable. That's true. However, in the grand scheme of things, my view is that that's not going to affect innovation that much. It will affect it some. And I'm not in favor of it. I certainly thought that was a bad idea because you don't want to disadvantage any drugs, particularly small molecule, because the small molecule drugs tend to be cheaper and they tend to help many, many more people, like statins. So it's unfortunate. But I think that overall, because for the most part, the innovative drugs right now are biologics, although obviously small molecules still play an important role, I think that innovation will still go on. More importantly, I think that if you develop a drug that is a really good drug that helps a lot of patients, if those two things are true, I believe in the United States, you will make a lot of money. And nobody will argue about that. If you're creating a marginal drug that's not that good, and it doesn't help that many people, you will have a hard time making money now in the United States. So I don't think that's necessarily always a bad thing, because drug prices in the US are really, really high, and it's hurting a lot of patients. So I think it's a mixed blessing. There are some good things and there are some bad things. But you're right, that it is a concern, particularly for some of the very popular small molecule drugs.
Thank you, Professor Dong. Thank you for your very impressive and clear speech. And you mentioned about the money that we MD, PhD, we don't know. I don't. And you mentioned that it's a difficulty for the investment is the risk and uncertainty. Uncertainty, we can make a little improvement, just like our Development Center for Biotechnology. You cooperate with us and make a doctor, then the uncertainty can decrease a little.
Yes.
But for risk, it's really very big. You mentioned that if we invest 100 companies with $30 billion US dollar, that of course we have no such big money. But do you think that exchange fund, or just like a fund to invest not only 1 or 2, 3, but 30, 50, 100, that will decrease the cumulative, the total risk? Is that popular in the United States or in the whole world? From the viewpoint of the investment, that increase the courage to invest in the biotechnology. This is the first question. The second question is that you also mentioned the first problem. You don't relate to you because that's not money. That's the science part. Do you think the science part also relates to the regulation or the process of approval by the FDA? Is that kind of improvement can decrease the importance of the number 2, 3, 4, then that makes the biotechnology research and investment easier. Do anyone or some deal with this to talk with the FDA or talk with to improve the methodology of license or the process of license, or even how is effective, what is effective? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so 2 very good points. The first point about whether or not you can have a portfolio of a smaller number, not 30 billion. It turns out you don't need 30 billion. 30 billion is what you need if you want to invest in the entire process of drug development for 150 companies. But in fact, you can make a very, very good rate of return for investors if you invest in 20 or 30 companies over a period of 5 to 7 years. That's definitely possible if you have the right kind of pool of projects. So using portfolio theory, and I describe some of that in my book and in other papers, you can actually select a group of portfolio companies that are doing very different things. So let me explain. If I decide to invest in 25 gene therapy companies, all doing gene therapy, and they're all using the same AAV9 vector, from my financial point of view, that's not a good idea. Because if that AAV9 has some kind of immunogenic problems, as it did, by the way, a year or 2 ago at Bluebird Bio, the FDA decided to put a hold on all AAV9 research for a while. They lifted the hold, but that introduces correlation. So from a financial point of view, constructing a diversified portfolio, 25 companies, if they're doing gene therapies, that's fine. Make sure they're using different vectors. One may be lentivirus, one may be AAV4, AAV5, but make sure that they're diversified so that if one fails, the other 24 are still okay. That's an example of financial thinking. Now, interestingly, financial thinking contradicts scientific thinking. From a scientist's point of view, if you're an expert in AAV9, then you want to use your expertise for many different things, all using AAV9, because you know how to construct those particular vectors. So from a scientific point of view, it makes sense to specialize and focus, but not from a financial point of view. So can you do both? The answer is yes. You can construct a new business model where the parent company is basically raising the money and investing in multiple subsidiary companies. Each one of them specializes on one thing, but the parent company raises money for 25 different things. And this way, investors can get diversification, but scientists can get focus at the subsidiary. This is a company that I created 7 years ago called Bridge Biopharma, focused on monogenic disorders. It is a holding company with 20 subsidiary companies doing very different things. So we know it works. The company is now, the parent company is worth about $7 billion. And some of the subsidiaries have failed. Some of the other subsidiaries have done spectacularly well. The point is that if you can't predict, then you should focus on not trying to predict, but basically pooling all of these together. So could you remind me of your second question?
About the regulation
Part. Yes. Right.
That's how to say this is effective.
Yes. So it turns out that regulation, and not only regulation, but science, both can actually do a lot to reduce risk. So for example, when the FDA introduced surrogate endpoints to a clinical trial, I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but I wasn't familiar with it for a while. A surrogate endpoint is when the FDA says, you know what, it's really hard to tell whether or not you're actually helping Alzheimer's patients, because you have to track them for 5 or 10 years. So, in order to get more drugs to patients faster, we will agree to approve a drug if you can achieve the surrogate endpoint of clearing the amyloid beta plaques. And that's an example where the FDA, just in one stroke of a pen, reduced the risk. And all of a sudden, Biogen and a bunch of other companies started developing drugs for Alzheimer's. That's one way. The second way is what you're doing already here. I've heard so much about your biobank with 700,000 samples. That is one of the largest biobanks in the world, okay? To understand what that means. You're all scientists, I'm not. But when I read this, let me tell you what I see, and you tell me if I'm wrong. A few weeks ago, a paper was published in Nature. That was a collaboration among 13 pharma companies and the UK Biobank. 15,000 patients. And they did deep sequencing of not only their tissue, but also in their cell-free DNA. And what they identified was 2,000 proteins, new proteins, that were correlated with certain disease states using, I guess, GWAS. 2,000 proteins. By the way, one of them was PCSK9. And we already know that PCSK9 is a pretty important gene and protein because we've got a drug that works really well at helping patients with very, very high levels of cholesterol, like magic, right? We just got a gift of 2,000 new proteins that we can look for, a few of which seem to be involved in multiple diseases. That's with 15,000 patients. You guys have 700,000. What can you do with that? Think of all of the things that you can do with that. One of the things you can do is reduce risk. Because if you can come up with a biomarker that identifies certain disease states and targets a particular drug for that biomarker, like Herceptin. Herceptin is a drug that was approved as a rare disease drug for breast cancer. Breast cancer is not a rare disease, but it turns out that women that are HER2 positive, that is less than 200,000 patients. That's a rare population. It's a rare disease. You can get it approved as a rare disease. So what you're doing here, the science that you're doing, can actually increase the Sharp ratio. This biobank that you have can dramatically increase the Sharp ratio. So the whole idea of precision medicine is basically increasing the Sharp ratio.
Oh, thank you. Well, in a way, you already just answered my questions. So my name is Chen Lee. I work for a resident company here in Korak Biomedical. This is the third Professor Lo, this is the third talk that I heard you gave on this subject, and I really, every time I learn a lot more than the previous one. So what I was going to ask about the question that you basically just touched upon, that how do you reduce risk? And you gave the example when you said 150, but assuming that they are all independent, but AAV is exactly what I was going to ask. So I think from biologist's point of view, every time when I heard you talk, it helps to provide us a framework of thinking, how to think, how to approach. And then you gave some example already. If we were to work from the biotech company side, how do we reduce the risk of our portfolio, and how do we communicate that to our investors? And you cover on a number of subjects. I thought if you have anything else to add to the answer you already gave to the last question, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I do have a few things to add. That's a really great point, because I do believe that it's a lot harder to teach a financial economist molecular biology than it is to teach a molecular biologist a little bit of finance. You don't need a lot of finance to be very effective at what you do. So yes, I think there are some things that can be done, and I hinted at them, but I can now describe in more detail exactly what I'm getting at. So the way that an investor thinks about risk is somewhat different than a way a biologist thinks about risk. A biologist, in general, is extremely cautious, extremely conservative. That's your nature. Because if you want to get published in a journal like Science, Nature, New England Journal, JAMA, the reviewers are going to look at every data point you have, every claim that you make, every footnote that you put, every citation you make, and if you make one mistake, just one, your paper's rejected. That's it. And if you make a mistake in public at a conference, that could be the end of your scientific career. It's very high stakes. And so we learn in science to be very careful and never say anything that you don't know for a fact is true. If we did that in investments, we would put all the money in T-bills. We can't do that in investments. We have to take risk. We have to take chances. And that's not in your scientific nature to do that. So when you start thinking about a biotech company, you need to change your brain and think like an investor, which means we don't know what's going to happen next year or in 3 years with the experiment. But what are the risks? Can we identify what the risks are? And how are those risks related? And what is going to help us reduce the risk? So, for example, let's say you have 3 different projects. You have a platform technology. You have 3 different projects. If one of them fails, what does that tell you about the other 2? Are you upset about the other 2? Is it unrelated to the other 2? Or is it maybe a good thing for the other 2? You might ask, well, how can it be a good thing? Well, suppose that you're looking for a certain effect with 3 potential proteins. You know it has to be one of them, but you don't know which one. A scientist would typically say, oh, let's do one at a time to save money. From my point of view, if I know it has to be one of the 3, I'm going to do all 3 at the same time, because then I know for a fact that I'm going to win. So when you think about designing your biotech company, you need to think about it from the point of view almost like a gambler. I don't know if people still play mahjong. When my mother lived here, all the time at nighttime, I would go to sleep hearing the mahjong guy, and at the end of the night, money changes hands. You have to think like a gambler, not like a scientist. And the question is, if I have 3 bets, and one of the bets fails, does that affect the other 2? If the answer is no, good. Then you're reducing the risk. Also, if you can describe, so you said 2 things. Number 1, how do you reduce the risk? And second, which is more important, what you said was how do we communicate the risk to investors? That is absolutely key. you need to explain to investors in plain terms that they can understand. That's how I speak. You were very kind to say that, you know, I was giving a clear talk yesterday. I have a secret. The reason I give clear talk is because that's the way I can understand it. I'm not up here with you, I'm down here. So I need to make it simple for me to understand it. You need to make your science simple for investors to understand it, and that means risk. So what can fail? What is likely to succeed? How do I tell failure or success? And who are the other experts that are doing this, and what do they think about it? And can I get experts to be on my advisory board to tell you that in their expert opinion, you should believe in me? That's how to raise money, is communication. You're absolutely right. That's part of the storytelling. You have to tell a story, you have to communicate clearly, and you have to think like a gambler in terms of making your bets as successful as possible.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning about the pre-competitive activities. I believe that was a pharma with a certain different pharmaceutical company. And in Taiwan, at least I myself repatriated for over 10 years, I did not really see a government-driven in terms of pre-competitive database. Could you comment on your observation of Taiwan and maybe suggest what we can do in the future? Thank you.
Well, I want to be very careful in what I say because I am definitely not an expert in Taiwan government or politics. I'm definitely a visitor. And you know, when you invite a friend to spend the weekend at your home, it's probably not a good idea for the friend to start rearranging your furniture, you know? So I'm not going to try to rearrange your furniture. But I will say that in general, government is a complicated thing in any country that requires, again, stories. You need to get politicians to understand what you're doing. And I have to say that scientists are the worst at communicating. And it's partly because we were taught a different language to communicate. We were taught not to tell stories, but to generate data and to test hypotheses and then come to conclusions. That's not how politicians think. And so if a scientist is going to start talking to a politician, and I urge all of you to do that, we need scientists to talk to politicians, then you need to tell them stories. So I would say, just like what you did with me, I didn't even need a story once I came into the building. Once I looked on the walls with all the names of the companies, and of course I know the publication record of Academia Sinica, that was all the story that I need. But I'm not the typical politician. So I think that what politicians understand are two things: gaining votes and saving lives. And they're highly correlated, interestingly enough. The other things that politicians understand is that they're all getting older. They all have sick children, sick parents, and there's a national resource here in this building and in Academia Sinica. And so somebody needs to tell these politicians a story that says Taiwan is #1 in semiconductors. Taiwan can be #1 in biotechnology. And this is the vision of how to get from here to there. Already you have Science Park, that is a very good start, but it's just a start. You need another few more $1 billion. And that would go a long way. And investors, I think investors can also be attracted because those companies here, I don't know any of those companies, but my guess is that among those 40 or 50 companies, you will have at least 1 or 2 successes. And all you need are 1 or 2. So from an investor's point of view, investing a fund of a couple of $100 million, $100 million is not that much money. By the way, Dr. Tu, you mentioned that $30 billion. Taiwan doesn't have it. Actually, Taiwan has a lot more than $30 billion. Taiwan has one of the largest foreign reserves, one of the US dollar reserves in the world. And the Taiwan financial sector has many, many hundreds of billions of dollars. But they need a story. They need a story in order to invest. And this building, what you're doing here, is an amazing, amazing story. So you just need to tell that story. I believe that a $200 million fund that invests in a diversified portfolio of companies here, but not just here, maybe at all the universities in Taiwan. So maybe a portfolio of all the intellectual property. That was the slides that I had to skip over. A lot of the innovation is happening in universities. I know that you're going to be speaking with Lauren Foster at MIT's Tech Transfer Office. She's a wonderful resource. Imagine putting together a portfolio of all of the different universities and research centers and hospitals and Academia Sinica, and that's the portfolio. $200 million seems like a very small amount of money to invest in all of these early stage translational medicine projects. And again, among that set, you only need one Moderna, one BioNTech, one Editas, one Foundation Medicine, one Vertex, and then you're done. Yeah. Are we in next? Are we in first? Okay, we in first, and then Dr. Chen.
Thank you, Professor Lo. A very wonderful speech. I got two key words from your speech. Number one is storytelling. Number two is the language. So I'm wondering, usually the scientists they told a story with a different language. The language investors totally don't understand. So do you have any suggestion? You probably have talked to a lot of the professors, scientists. They want to become entrepreneurs to start their own companies, MIT, Harvard. Do you have any suggestions or advices to the professors on the floor who want to become the entrepreneurs, start their own companies, about the storytelling language issues? Thank you.
Yes, another great point. I think that one way to learn, and we all have to learn. You took many years to learn your language of molecular biology. So you're going to have to spend some time learning the language of venture capital. The answer is to talk to VCs and talk to successful entrepreneurs. For faculty, colleagues of yours that have succeeded in working with entrepreneurs, and ask them, how did you do it? What do investors want? Can you show me how to give a pitch talk? And there are many friendly biotech entrepreneurs and biotech VCs that I believe would love to help this organization with the talent that's here. So even at MIT, which has a lot of resources, even there, we have assistant professors that don't know how to do this. So that's why Harvey Lodish and I taught this course, The Science and Business of Biotech. I think that even with that course, we still bring in visitors from outside to give lectures. So one thing that Academia Sinica can do is to perhaps organize a monthly seminar where you get biotech investors to come here and give a talk to all of you about what they're looking for. And by the way, when you invite them here, maybe give them the tour that you gave me and introduce them to some of those 47 companies. They would love to see what's going on here. So I think that creating a plan for communication could actually be very, very effective. And then having professors be part of those seminars could be really helpful. Now, I want to be very cautious and mention that obviously in this audience, because we're obviously focusing on translational medicine, all of you are very excited and interested to do this. But I know for a fact that in every academic organization, including Academia Sinica, there are probably faculty that do not want to do this, and that not only do not want to do this, that are dead set against this, because they think that it is obscene and dirty to get involved with business and try to make money. And they want to have pure research. You know what I'm talking about, I gather. You've seen that. I see this in my field too. And I want to say that it is possible for those professors to live side by side happily with us, because you need them. You need them. You need the basic science to happen. David Baltimore and Howard Temin, when they discovered reverse transcriptase, they were not trying to start a biotech company. And you need those breakthrough ideas. So we have to respect them. But they, in turn, need to understand that they need us. Because without the drugs that you are all developing, the politicians aren't going to be writing the checks to support their research. So it's an ecosystem where we have to help each other. And so that's something that needs to be discussed internally. Because if you're trying to move too fast on translational medicine, you can create, what do they call this, a cytokine storm, an immunological response, and they get very angry at you. So I think that that's something to be cautious about. But given what you have built here and what is possible and what I know about the Taiwanese people and the Taiwanese culture for hard work and innovation, there is no reason why biotechnology can't be the next semiconductor industry for Taiwan.
Professor Lo, thank you very much for your very, very lively talk. I totally agree with you that scientists is the least people that know how to communicate, because your talk is the most lively talk in my whole career I've been listening to. Okay, so also one observation, I think the problem of Taiwan might be from education, because I have never been educated in gambling during my whole career. Okay, but my real question is, starting from a new startup company, as you said, we are still struggling to fundraising. However, we still need to develop something to increase the science. I mean, so how much percentage you think we should spend in a second project, at the beginning of a startup company? Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's a very tough question, because it really depends on on your bandwidth and also the nature of your research. For example, if you're focusing on a particular technique that happens to be a platform that can generalize to many different diseases, then it's easy to work on multiple projects. But if you're working on trying to understand the particular mechanism of one disease, and you spent a long time working on it and you're close to a breakthrough, then you really don't have a choice but to continue working on that one disease with that one mechanism. So I would say that probably don't worry at this stage about diversifying across lots of different areas, because as a scientist, you will not succeed in your field if you are too dispersed in your focus. That's why science needs focus. The problems you're working on are not easy problems. They really require your full attention. Where the diversification can happen is after you are able to achieve a particular breakthrough and you start talking to other colleagues, maybe then they can help you think about diversifying. But by that I mean collaborating with other people. When I was much younger at MIT and I knew nothing about how the biology field works, I was on a university personnel committee where we reviewed the tenure cases of people in multiple departments, including biology. And every once in a while, we get a biology case, and I would look at the publication record. And the publication record for tenure would be like, 50 papers, 50 publications. And each publication would have like 25 authors, 10 authors. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is really not this is not right. The biologists must be really sneaky, they're trying to pad their vita with all of these publications. Because in economics, when we come up for tenure, maybe we have 5, 7 publications, and many of them single authored. And so I first thought these biologists, they're very, very sleazy. They're trying to sneak in tenure by getting lots. And then I actually learned about these problems they're working on. And they're really hard problems. And if you want to try to do everything, one biologist trying to do everything, you want to do your own sequencing, your own cultures, your own mouse models, it'll take you 50 years to do one experiment. What do? You collaborate with 25 people, and that's how progress works. It turns out the same thing is true of biotech companies. So you can diversify not just by yourself, but by bringing on board collaborators that will contribute their ideas. They'll earn some of the profits of your company, but it's better to have a successful company and split the profits than to own 100% of nothing. So that's how I think diversification would be more effective. And of course, as you become a more established scientist, if you've got 10 or 20 years of experience, then you may have your own portfolio of different ideas that you can construct. At MIT, I had the great honor to meet with Bob Langer, who has started up 50 companies. And I don't know what his publication record is, but he is the most highly cited engineer or scientist across all fields. So somebody like him, he has his own portfolio of companies and ideas.
Sorry. Thank you, Professor Lo. I want to share a little experience before I come to my question. In 2019, I was in your class, with Harvey Lodesh. I think I was sat in the front. Maybe that's why you still remember my face. And toward the end of the semester, we had a presentation. His students were grouped, like 4 or 5 of us. One of us is from MIT. She's taking her PhD program. Another one is from Paris. He's a Sloan student from Paris and finance background. Never took biology since high school. So every time after class, especially Harvey's part, he had to take extra class. I think Kate actually helped him a lot. And I had to go to Chi1 for him to actually boost me with the finance part. And this student, and after graduating, he's currently managing the biotech portfolio, I mean investment arm for JP Morgan, I guess, in New York. And I was so impressed the cross-discipline, cross-domain communication. So since I'm back in Taiwan, I try to see if there's anything that can come close to that program. And when I look around, of course, the bioscientists part are very enthusiastic about having this kind of talk. But when we look at the faculty from the business school, there are less people that can actually teach this kind of courses. So my question will be, how would you describe the impact of that class, the science and business of biotech had over the years? Because I know that class went viral, and I think more than 30,000 people actually took the class. Even some of us actually took it online, and that created a lot of inspirational ideas and cross-discipline talks. But here in Taiwan, that doesn't get across to the finance, investment, or the business school side. So I would say, then how would you recommend Taiwan as a country to actually try to develop those kind of interdisciplinary communication?
So, well, thank you for your kind comments about my course. I'm very grateful and honored to have taught that course. And I should explain a little bit about for those of you who don't know. So I teach finance at a business school at MIT. And for years, that's what I did. I taught investments, basic finance, introductory finance, corporate finance. Healthcare finance as a field really didn't exist. And I'm not sure it exists now, because as far as I know, I'm the only one who teaches a course like this. Although my 2 students now have now graduated. One of them just got tenure, and he's teaching a course on this. So it's just starting. The reason I wrote the textbook that I published last year is so that other business schools can start offering it. But I have to say that, you know, I want to be supportive of my colleagues in economics and finance, because it is a very difficult subject. The only reason that I decided to do this was because of those 6 people close to me who died. And I was desperate. And when you're desperate, you do desperate things. I would never in a million years ever talked to an oncologist. I sat yesterday next to Dr. Wang, one of the preeminent oncologists in Taiwan. I would never dare to talk to somebody like him because he's so accomplished. And what the hell do I know? Well, I'm an economist. Why am I talking to a world-famous oncologist? But I couldn't help. I had no choice. My mother was dying. And so if you're desperate enough, you start to do things that really, you wouldn't ordinarily do. And most of my economics colleagues, frankly, they're scared of talking to you all because they don't know how to speak your language. And it took me a long time to learn. And I did have a good biology background in high school. I worked on a biology project. I studied the infective pathway of bacteriophage T4. And I actually even did some Sanger sequencing, as a high school student. But nothing prepared me for all of the technical things that have gone on since then. And so one of my biotech venture capital friends at the time told me something when I was asking him, should I start studying how to finance these biomedical projects? He said, you could do that, but it's going to take you a while. And you have to remember one thing. When you talk to a scientist, you better prepare. And you better know what you're talking about. Because if you say one stupid thing in that first conversation, that will be the last conversation you have with that scientist. And he's right. I've met a number of oncologists in particular, because that's how I got interested in this. And they're very busy, very accomplished people. All of them, and all of you who have MDs or PhDs or MD PhDs, I promise you, all of you, you could become managing directors at Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or any investment bank you want. You could have all done that. Because in order to get a PhD, in order to get into a PhD, in order to get into medical school, I know your academic record would be so strong that you could easily become an investment banker. So he said to me, if you talk to one of these doctors, you better know what you're talking about, because if you say something stupid, that will be the last conversation you have. And so I took his advice, I prepared. And I did that because people around me were dying. So I don't know that any other financial economist would have the same motivation, because it takes a while to understand, these terminologies. But the reason I wrote my book was because I wanted to have my fellow economists not have to learn all of that from scratch. They now have a book that they can learn it from. And so I think that that's happening, but it's going to take some time. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so honored to be here and to speak at NTU Management yesterday. I was shocked. I was not planning to give a lecture. I was here on vacation with family. And it was one of my friends, a former MIT colleague who happened to know Christina Liu, their classmates, and let her know that I was in town. And she called me up and said, would you like to give a talk? And I said, fine, I'm happy to do that. I thought I was going to be speaking to 10 or 15 people at at NTU around a lunch table or something like that, because it's Christmas holiday. Why are people here? It's 150 people came yesterday. I wasn't prepared for that. So I think that I'm hoping that my fellow economists will be interested, but they need help. And I'm honored that Dr. Peng came from Academia Sinica, from my section, and I'm hoping that there'll be interest among my colleagues soon.
Okay, because time is leaving, we only allow less than 3 questions. Okay, you first, and then you second.
I have a quick question. Yeah, I think you mentioned about Professor Bob Langer. I was visiting him in February. Actually, he has about, I think one of the venture capital I associate with him has invested 6 companies in Cambridge, near that area. And a couple of them are spin off from Professor Langer. And I know he's probably the richest professor at MIT.
Definitely.
So I have some observation. I wonder whether some of that will become successful factors or not, particularly related to exit strategy. Okay. I think among some of those investing companies that I visit to, I think one of the key issues is try to switching between technology, biotech versus other technology. I think because some of that is related to the device itself, okay? So if you are getting into more biotechnology, you become more a service company, you have to go through a sequence of other things. But if you become a technology company, you can easily to get exits to it, okay? So they are struggling in some of those issues. I wonder whether you have some advice in terms of, or experience in terms of that area, okay? And then second is that many of those companies actually started to have office at the Cambridge of nearby, okay? I think I do not know exactly the environment of the Cambridge or some of the issues that if you have an office in Cambridge area and connect that to the original country, because some of the company coming from the middle, like Czechoslovakia or some other countries. Okay, I think there are some advantage of office in Cambridge. I wonder whether you have some comment on those areas.
Yes, comments on both. First, in terms of exit strategies at technology companies, I think that it depends on the nature of the company you're trying to start. If it is genuinely a technology company, for example, if you're doing bioinformatics, AI-based drug discovery, then I think you might be able to call yourself a technology company and then be able to get an exit. However, I have to tell you that all the technology companies that I know of, they've eventually decided that they want to become drug companies. So I'm on the board of two public companies, one public company, one private company. The public company is Epsilera, and the private company is Atomwise. Both of them are involved in using AI for drug discovery. Atomwise focusing on small molecules, Epsilera focusing on large molecules, proteins. And both of them started out as service companies. And both of them have made the decision to pivot to become drug companies. And the reason is pretty simple. If you look at the multiples that you get from Wall Street for being a drug company, it is a lot higher than being just a service company. Now, when I say service company, what they were doing was providing drug discovery services for a fee. That's very different than Uber or PayPal, where the leverage is tremendous for scaling, and you can get exponential valuations very quickly. Biotech and bioinformatics service companies don't have that same exponential growth curve. And so I would say that if that's what you want to do, and that's what your technology is, that's fine, go ahead and do that. But if what you're doing really works, if what you can do is really identify promising protein targets or small molecule drugs, then at some point you're going to make the decision, gee, I should develop my own drugs rather than helping other people develop their drugs. So that's the first one. The second question you asked was about being in Cambridge. So I think I mentioned that there's an opportunity for benefiting from being in the United States because that is the largest and most profitable drug market in the world. And I don't say that proudly, by the way. It's quite an embarrassment that in the United States, 17% of our GDP is devoted to healthcare. But I don't know that our healthcare is any better than yours. And you guys have 6% GDP devoted to healthcare. Now, I think you should be higher than 6%, by the way. But I also think we should be less than 17%. But it is what it is. The point is that if you can license your technologies developed here with a US-based company, not only do you get access to NSF and NIH money, as I described with Dr. Liu's company, Agilis, but you also get access to the US healthcare market, which is very, very profitable. So in those calculations that I showed you before, the numbers get very big if you have a US presence. And Cambridge, by the way, is a very easy place to establish a physical location because we have the equivalent of WeWorks for biotech. We have Lab Central, where you can rent a bench for $2,000 a month. And then all of a sudden, you're now in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So if you can find US collaborators, that will give you access to US money. And I actually think there should be a really interesting idea to get investors to invest in a fund that is investing in collaboration between US and Taiwan. I think that that could be a really exciting opportunity. And I hope that Taiwanese investors would be interested in doing that as well as US investors. Okay, thank you. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lo, for your overwhelmingly amazing talk. I attended your talk yesterday, and in my opinion, in considering of your theory about the 30 million $30 on 150 companies, I think that's something like reasonable gambler strategy or shotgun strategy. So I have a still better question, but I am eager to know, do you have any plan to initiate a mega fund or fund in Taiwan, raising fund from sovereign or pension or banker, some big banker, and or any suggestion to somebody who want to do something like your theory? In addition, what's the suggestion in addition to collaboration and the story talking? Thank you.
Well, so the short answer is I'm working on it, but let me explain. When I first started this 15 years ago, my objective was not making money. In fact, I've been very fortunate in that in 1999, I started my own asset management company, a company called Alpha Simplex Group. At that point, I was interested in taking my ideas of quantitative finance and implementing it directly. So I started a company. I sold it in 2007 to a large, big bank, but I stayed with the company for another 10 years to develop it. And by the time I decided to leave the company in 2018, we were managing about $9 billion. So I made some money, and I felt very good about it. But it was part of that time was when I was dealing with all of my friends and family dying of cancer. And so eventually I said, I don't really want to do finance anymore. I want to focus on healthcare. So I decided to leave the company. And part of the reason I left it was because as I was writing papers and publishing about my ideas, more and more I would get requests from biotech companies asking me to help them with their portfolio, and even pharma companies came to ask me. And I told them, I can't do this as an academic, because as an academic, everything that I do, that I publish. So all of these models papers that I've written, all of the software is available on my website for free with an open source license. So any of the models that I've used, you can download it right now. But then they said, well, we don't want you to publish results with our data. We want to do this on a consulting basis. So in 2019, I created a company called QLS Advisors, Quantitative Life Sciences Advisors. And so originally, the purpose of the company was just to produce analytics, machine learning forecasts of clinical trial outcomes, portfolio construction tools, financial valuation models, just like some of the things I showed you. 2 years ago, some of my early investors in the previous company, Alpha Simplex Group, they heard about what I was doing, and they said, have you ever thought about using your models to invest money directly? And I said, no, I already started an asset management company. I sold it. I'm not interested in doing asset management. And they said, well, if you are, we would be interested in investing. And so for the last 2 years, I've started to think about that more systematically. And because of financial regulations, I'm not allowed to talk about specific funds. I'm not allowed to advertise because they're private funds. But I'm hoping that, at least in the US, I might be able to launch something at some point. So we're working on that and taking the ideas and implementing it. I already started several companies that are successful, BridgeBio being one of them. I talked about that yesterday. There are 3 or 4 other companies that I've launched, Roivant, Quantal Health, Uncommon Cures. These are all companies that have seemed to have done well on the biotech front. So my plan is to continue doing that, but I want to do it in a larger scale, and so I'm working on it, but nothing that I can announce, formally right now. And if I do, obviously I would love to invest in Taiwan companies, and possibly, I don't know that many Taiwan investors, but I imagine that Taiwanese investors would be happy to invest in this particular community. And if not, I'm happy to be involved in doing that with them.
Any other question from the audience? Okay. Yeah, you first. Yeah. Then Dr. Koo, I think it's a final. Okay, you first. Yeah.
Dr. Lo, thank you for your inspiring talk. So I'm a young faculty in academia Sinica and try to translate my basic research into clinic. So I know to tell a good story is very important things. So you already show us and tell us how to be a good storyteller. So another question is how do we identify our mind is a good story, or how to evaluate, how to find a good story, or how to evaluate mind is a good story?
Well, that's a very hard question, and I'll try to answer it. I'm not sure I'm the most qualified, but one way to tell whether it's a good story is tell the story to somebody who's not a specialist. So in other words, don't tell your colleague down the hall, but maybe tell your third grade teacher, or tell your high school friend who is now in the restaurant business. Tell the common person what the story is. If you can explain your story, for example, I can tell you a story about gene editing. I can tell you a story about mRNA. Because in order for me to understand it, I have to bring it down to my level. So you need to either talk to somebody who is not a specialist and then get their reaction, or actually work with a professional storyteller. So here's an idea. ChatGPT is actually a pretty good storyteller, seriously. So you might want to put an abstract of one of your papers in ChatGPT and ask it to rewrite that abstract so that it's understandable to an 11th grade student, and see what ChatGPT can do. That might be a good start. But I think that's the idea. You need to be able to take your years of work and all of the deep science and boil it down to a 3-minute conversation. If you can do that, first of all, if you can do that, you're going to be getting a lot of grants. That's a very good skill to have. But you'll also be able to get investors to be excited about what you're doing.
Okay, Dr. Koo's final question.
Thank you. Yeah. I was giving a lecture on ADC, antibody drug conjugate, for 3 hours yesterday. And of course, I have to talk about just a couple of weeks ago, Pfizer bought Seagen for $45 billion. I used to work for Wyeth. So Pfizer bought Wyeth back in 2009 for $68 billion. But there seems to be a tremendous inflation in terms of merger acquisition prices. Or the three famous ADC company, $45 billion for Seagen, and then Immunomedics, I believe 2020 for Trodelvy, it was traded for $20 billion. And then of course the Immunogen is $10 billion. So I'm really wondering how the price get inflated so much, and whether the merger and acquisition really in the end worth the price tag.
Well, so the short answer from an economist's point of view is, if somebody's willing to pay for it, it's worth it. The market works. But let me give you a more intelligent and deeper answer. So the way that pharma decides the price is very simple. They take a look at what they're buying. They calculate the profits from each of the different assets just like I did, and they look at the sum and ask whether or not what they're paying is smaller or bigger than the sum. If it's smaller, then they'll buy it. If it's bigger, they won't buy it. And so when they're looking at these antibody drug conjugates, they're looking at the number of cancer patients that are out there that could benefit from it, or other diseases that are being treated by these ADCs. And they're just doing the math. And the math is that it's really, really profitable. I mean, you know, that kind of money, it sounds insane, but that's why I'm telling you that, you know, if you think about what's going on here in this building, with all of the work that you're doing, if we can get, you know, a couple of $100 million to invest in all of these different things, one of those companies may turn out to be another one of these immunogens, and you get a small piece of 10 billion. It doesn't, you don't need a very big piece of 10 billion to be greater than 200 million and earn a lot of money for your investors. So yes, it is, I think it's worth it, and I think that there are many more drugs like that out there that will be even more worth it, and it's going to save lots and lots of lives.
Of course, the really question I want to ask is how Taiwan company can do in order to entice the multinational farmer come to acquire some of Taiwan company.
I think the answer is also very simple. You need to produce successes. And what you're doing here, the preclinical work that you're doing, the basic science that you're doing, is exactly what's needed. But you need more shots on goal. What that means is you need many, many more tries. You need to be bigger. You need to have many more diverse projects. And you need more funding. So, and I think you need to make the case, both not only to government, but to investors, that this is the future of Taiwan. You know, semiconductors is the present. And that's something that Taiwan should be very proud of. That, you know, even in the United States, with 350 million people versus your 23 million people, with the number of engineers that we produce. In fact, MIT, you know, produces many more engineers than Taiwan does. But with all of that, TSMC still beat out the companies in the US. In fact, you know, when I was a student in high school, my sister was an undergraduate at MIT. And at the time, she said that MIT, when people asked what did that stand for, she said it stands for Made in Taiwan. That's the reputation that Taiwan has. But that's in semiconductors. Why, you know, with 23 million people, how did you do that? How did you do that? The same thing you can do with biotech. The same thing, I believe, the same thing you can do with biotech. Because it's not the total number of people. It's how smart you are and how hard you work. And I know both about Taiwan, and that's why I think that this is such an important field that can be the future, the next semiconductor industry here in this country.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we need to end this special meeting here. Last, thanks again for Professor Lo's.